The heavy metallic doors of the docking bay slid shut behind Lieutenant Andrew Solis with a hiss, trapping the cold air of the station in a compressed vacuum of silence. He pulled the stiff collar of his military jacket closer around his neck, eyes narrowing as he scanned the vast, brightly lit hangar. His destination was clear. Standing before him, like some forbidden shrine, was the towering alien spacecraft. Sleek, imposing, and otherworldly, its silver-black hull gleamed under the artificial lights. It looked out of place among the clunky human ships docked beside it, like a predator among prey. The air in the bay had a weight to it, something beyond the cool chill of the recycled oxygen. It was the presence of them, the creatures, the Vrelek. For weeks, Andrew had been briefed about this day, this mission. He was selected, trained, and hardened for the task of covertly infiltrating the alien delegation. The peace negotiations between Earth and the Vrelek had been tense, fragile at best. And yet, humanity's leaders had insisted they would be different. There was always the naive hope that maybe, this time, peace would hold. But the reality had always been far more perilous, more treacherous. Humanity's ambitions were met with alien indifference. The Vrelek had little interest in diplomacy. Andrew's orders were simple: get aboard the Vrelek ship, gather intelligence, and return. The future of Earth's entire alliance might hinge on what he uncovered. There were whispers of new alien technology, hints of something dangerous the Vrelek were hiding. Earth was on edge. He was the one sent to find out if those whispers were true. His boots echoed in the cavernous space as he walked toward the ship, each step bringing him closer to the waiting portal. But just as he neared the entrance ramp, his path was blocked. It was then that Andrew came face to face with the guard. The creature was taller than any human Andrew had ever encountered. Its skin, a sickly silver sheen, rippled with muscle beneath an intricate black armor that appeared to pulse with a life of its own. Large, obsidian eyes stared unblinking at him, cold and calculating. The guard's elongated fingers, 4 of them, curled and uncurled at its side. It was as though it sensed Andrew's presence before he had even approached, its rigid posture softening into something more menacing as he neared. Its breathing was faint, shallow, yet constant, each intake a whisper against the stillness of the hangar. Andrew's eyes flicked to the passage beyond the guard, the open door of the Vrelek vessel. He could see other Vrelek moving about inside, busy at their consoles, speaking in the low murmurs of their guttural language. The ramp was clear, the opportunity ripe. But this one alien guard, silent and motionless as stone, stood in his way. Papers. The word was sharp, clipped, and unexpected. The alien's voice was not human, far from it. There was a guttural undercurrent to the sound, a distortion as though the air itself struggled to shape the syllables correctly. Andrew, not missing a beat, reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the forged identification that had been crafted meticulously for this mission. The card felt heavy in his hand, the weight of a lie pressing against his palm. He extended it forward without hesitation, keeping his expression neutral. The alien didn't take it. Instead, it tilted its head, eyes narrowing as its gaze flicked between the card and Andrew's face. The alien's silence grew oppressive, a low hum in the back of Andrew's mind as it seemed to scan every part of him, not just his body, but his intentions, his thoughts. His skin prickled under the scrutiny. This was the moment he had been trained for. Andrew knew that the Vrelek had technology far beyond human capabilities. They could sense deception, read heartbeats, even detect subtle changes in body temperature. His only hope was that the forged credentials would pass muster. He remained still, confident, even though his pulse hammered in his chest like a war drum. For a long, agonizing moment, the guard said nothing. Its large, black eyes seemed to bore into Andrew's very soul, searching for the slightest crack in his facade. Then, without warning, it raised its hand, fingers stretched, palm outward. Andrew froze. The motion was a signal, not of acceptance, but of denial. "You will not board," the alien declared, voice sharp and final. Andrew's gut tightened. He had to think fast. "I'm with the delegation," he replied coolly, trying to mirror the calm, impassive tone the Vrelek often used. He gestured to the card still hanging between them. "My credentials are verified by your officers." The alien didn't waver. Its hand remained extended in refusal. "This human does not pass," it said, louder this time, attracting the attention of the other Vrelek nearby. One of them looked up, eyes narrowing in Andrew's direction. His heart skipped. Time was running out. Andrew was no fool. He knew something was wrong. Despite the perfection of the forgery, despite every preparation he had undergone, the guard knew, or at least suspected. The mission teetered on the edge of failure. A lesser man might have panicked, turned away, or even pleaded. But Andrew Solis was not a lesser man. He had trained too hard, come too far. He couldn't afford to fail, not with so much at stake. He took a step back, hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Look, there's been a mistake," he said, voice steady. "I'm just following orders. If you need to verify—" But the guard didn't give him a chance to finish. With an almost imperceptible shift in its stance, the alien's other hand moved toward the sleek, cylindrical device at its waist. A weapon, no doubt. Its movements were swift and deliberate, the cold precision of a species bred for war. Andrew felt his muscles tense, instinct screaming at him to retreat, to run. But his mind held firm. He couldn't let this confrontation escalate. Not here. Not now. He needed another angle, another way in. His gaze flicked to the other side of the ship. A second ramp, partially obscured by the vessel's wing, led to an alternate entrance, unmonitored, at least for now. If he could get the guard to turn away, even for a moment, he might still have a chance. "I don't want any trouble," Andrew said, voice dropping to a quieter, more disarming tone. "We're all on the same side here, right?" The guard's eyes remained locked on his, unmoved. But Andrew wasn't waiting for a response. His hand subtly moved to his waist, where a small, concealed EMP device rested. It was his backup plan, the one contingency for situations just like this. He had no desire to harm the guard, but a brief power disruption might be all he needed to slip past unnoticed. He just needed the timing to be perfect. The alien took a single step forward, still wary, its weapon now fully in hand. Andrew's fingers brushed the activation button on the EMP. One quick pulse, a distraction. A moment was all it would take. His body tensed, ready to act. But then, just as the alien seemed ready to escalate, a voice called out from the ship. "Leave him." Andrew blinked, eyes darting toward the source. Standing at the top of the ramp was another Vrelek, but this one was different, taller, more regal in appearance. Its armor was adorned with intricate markings, shimmering with hues of blue and gold, a stark contrast to the dark, militaristic garb of the guard. Its voice was calm, almost soothing, as it addressed the guard directly. "We are not here to provoke a conflict," the new Vrelek said, glancing at Andrew with a cold, indifferent gaze. "He may board." The guard hesitated, its grip on the weapon tightening for a moment before slowly lowering it. The tension in the air remained thick, but the confrontation was over, at least for now. Andrew let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His heart still raced, but the path ahead was clear. He had been granted passage, though the cost of that favor remained to be seen. Without a word, the guard stepped aside, allowing Andrew to pass. But as he ascended the ramp, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The eyes of the guard followed him, unblinking, watchful, as though it knew something Andrew didn't. And in that moment, as he crossed the threshold into the alien ship, Andrew realized this mission had just become far more dangerous than he had ever anticipated. Andrew's boots made a soft clanking noise as they met the metal ramp, a sound that echoed through the cavernous interior of the alien ship. The air within the vessel was colder than he expected, almost sterile, and it clung to his skin in a way that made him feel exposed, vulnerable, even. He had passed the first test, but the real danger was only beginning. He could feel the eyes of the Vrelek guard still on him, even though the creature had physically stepped aside. Every instinct told him to remain on edge, to trust nothing here. The regal Vrelek who had intervened from the top of the ramp was now gone, having disappeared into the deeper recesses of the ship without so much as a second glance in his direction. Andrew suspected that whatever this figure's true role was, It carried more weight than any military rank he had seen among the aliens so far. Something about the way the others deferred to this Vrelek told him that much. The narrow corridors stretched ahead, their walls shimmering with an organic quality that unnerved him. It was as if the ship itself were alive, breathing, watching. He moved cautiously, keeping his senses sharp. His mission, get in, gather intel, and get out, now felt impossibly simplistic. Nothing about this situation matched the briefings. As he stepped deeper into the vessel, the cold realization settled in that his assumptions about the Vrelek had been based on incomplete, if not entirely misleading, information. They were not just a highly intelligent species. There was something other, something that felt more ancient and dangerous than any simple interstellar politics could explain. Andrew walked down the corridor, his forged papers now tucked safely back into his jacket. His mind raced through possible next steps. He had to find something, some piece of technology or communication logs that would justify the risks he was taking. But as the minutes stretched on, unease grew in his chest. There was no sound in the hallways, no movement, no noise, just the oppressive silence of an alien world he couldn't understand. A junction appeared ahead, and as Andrew rounded the corner, he almost collided with another Vrelek. This one, however, was different, smaller than the others, with softer features that made it almost human. Its silver skin had a slight sheen, but its eyes, unlike the black orbs of the others, were a deep, unsettling shade of violet. There was an intelligence in them that unnerved Andrew, but also something else, curiosity. Human, the creature said, its voice much gentler than the others he'd heard, though still distorted in an alien way. You are not where you should be. Andrew blinked, his body stiffening at the sound of its voice. There was no hostility, but that didn't mean he was safe. I'm following my orders, he said carefully, trying to gauge how much the creature knew. I'm with the Earth delegation. The alien tilted its head, studying him with those unsettling violet eyes. It stepped closer, and Andrew resisted the urge to step back. There was something about this one that felt off, a different kind of threat. Not the raw physical power of the Vrelek guard, but something far more dangerous. You humans, so many lies, it said softly, almost thoughtfully, as if musing to itself. You cannot hide from us. The words sent a chill down his spine. Andrew's hand twitched instinctively toward his waist, toward the EMP device still strapped there, but the alien made no move to stop him. Instead, it reached out with one slender hand and placed it gently against his chest, over his heart. What are you doing? Andrew asked, unable to keep the edge of panic from his voice. His pulse quickened, the coldness of the creature's touch seeping into him. Such fear, the alien whispered, its voice softer now, almost a sigh. It clouds your thoughts. Andrew flinched as a wave of dizziness swept over him. For a moment, the world around him seemed to blur, the walls of the alien ship warping as if they were made of liquid. His vision swam, and his knees buckled under the weight of something he couldn't explain. A pressure, like being underwater. He gasped, struggling to keep his balance, to stay focused. Stop! His voice was strained, weak. The alien stepped back, its violet eyes now glowing faintly. You cannot hide from what you are, human. And you will not survive here unless you accept the truth. What truth? Andrew spat, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the creature had stripped away all his defenses with a single touch. The cold certainty that he was out of his depth clawed at him. The alien turned its back on him, walking away down the corridor as if it had already said everything that needed to be said. Andrew's heart hammered in his chest. His mind raced to piece together what had just happened, but there was no logic to it, no explanation that fit into the framework of his training, of his understanding of the Vrelek. He had been so sure of his mission, so certain of the steps he needed to take. But now, everything felt wrong. Was he losing control? No, he couldn't let himself believe that. He was a soldier. He had been trained for this. He was in control. He had to be. Forcing himself to move, Andrew stumbled forward. His legs felt heavy, his thoughts clouded. The hallway stretched out like a tunnel, the lights dimming as he pushed further into the heart of the ship. The unsettling feeling in his chest gnawed at him, but he pressed on. He had no choice. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached a large chamber. The walls here were adorned with strange symbols, glowing, pulsating in a rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat. In the center of the room stood a massive, translucent sphere. Suspended within it was a figure, human, or at least something that resembled human. Andrew's breath caught in his throat as he stepped closer. The figure inside the sphere had features eerily similar to his own. Short cropped hair, military uniform. Everything about the figure screamed familiarity. But there was one detail that chilled Andrew to the core. The eyes. They were black, just like the Vrelek. Andrew's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, fingers tightening around the grip of the weapon. What the hell was this? Was it a clone? An experiment? His mind struggled to comprehend the sight before him, but the longer he stared, the more a sickening realization crept over him. This wasn't just some random experiment. It was him. Or at least, it was meant to be him. Andrew stepped closer to the sphere, his breath shallow. The figure inside stirred, its eyes slowly opening. For a brief moment, they locked gazes, and Andrew felt a jolt of something primal. Fear, yes, but also recognition. This thing, this copy, it knew him. It understood him in a way that no alien could. "Welcome, Andrew," the figure inside the sphere said, its voice a hollow echo. "You were not supposed to find this." The voice, his own voice, echoed in the chamber, but it carried none of the humanity that Andrew knew. It was cold, detached, as though it came from something pretending to be him, something that had learned his mannerisms, his thoughts, but lacked the soul behind them. "What are you?" Andrew's voice trembled, his grip tightening on the gun at his side. The figure smiled, but the smile never reached its eyes. "I am you. Or at least, I will be." "No." Andrew shook his head, taking a step back. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. The mission, the Vrelek, everything he had been sent to do. It was all a lie, wasn't it? A trap? "You still don't understand, do you?" The figure inside the sphere continued, its voice unnervingly calm. "The Vrelek don't need to invade your planet. They don't need to fight your wars. They just need you to bring yourself to them." Andrew's mind raced. "You're saying they're going to replace me? Replace all of us?" The thing in the sphere chuckled, a sound that made Andrew's skin crawl. "No, not replace. Integrate. Improve. The Vrelek have been doing this for centuries, across countless worlds. You thought you were here on a mission of espionage? No, Andrew. You are the mission." The room seemed to close in on him, the walls pulsing with that same rhythmic heartbeat. Andrew's stomach twisted in knots as the weight of the truth settled over him. He wasn't here to gather intelligence. He wasn't here to uncover some secret alien technology. He was here to be assimilated, to become part of the Vrelek's grand experiment. And he had walked right into their trap. His vision blurred as the reality of his situation hit him. Every step he had taken, every decision, it had all been orchestrated. They had been guiding him, watching him, and now he was nothing more than a pawn in their game. "I won't let this happen," Andrew said through gritted teeth, his hand shaking as he raised his sidearm, aiming it directly at the sphere. He had one chance to end this, to destroy whatever twisted plan the Vrelek had in store for him. But before he could pull the trigger, the figure inside the sphere smiled again, this time with a hint of pity. "You've already lost, Andrew. The only question now is, how long will it take for you to accept it?" His finger hovered over the trigger, indecision clawing at him. Was this even real? Was this some trick of the mind? He didn't know what to believe anymore. Everything felt twisted, upside down. And in that moment, the guard appeared again, silently materializing at the entrance of the chamber. Its black eyes gleamed with the same cold indifference as before. "You do not belong here," the guard said in that low, guttural voice. But there was no aggression now, only inevitability. Andrew's pulse pounded in his ears. He was trapped, caught between the truth he couldn't comprehend and the nightmare unfolding before him. His certainties had been shattered, his mission a lie. But one thing remained. one small, flickering flame of defiance. "I will never become one of you," Andrew growled, lowering the gun but keeping his grip firm. The figure inside the sphere cocked its head. "You already are." Andrew's hand trembled slightly as he lowered the gun, the weight of the truth bearing down on him like gravity, pulling him into the abyss. The clone? No, the version of him, trapped in the sphere, stared back with those eerie black eyes, a reflection of everything Andrew had tried to deny since stepping onto the Vrelek ship. It was him. It wasn't some crude imitation or biological experiment. It was a version of him engineered to be part of the Vrelek's greater plan. His mind raced, trying to fit the pieces together, trying to find an escape from a trap that had been in place long before he'd even realized it. "You've already lost," the copy repeated, its voice echoing in the chamber. But Andrew wasn't ready to accept that. He couldn't. As he stood there, torn between the reality of the situation and his own crumbling sense of control, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. He was on the ship not to gather intelligence or even to sabotage their operations, but to become a part of them, to be assimilated. The Vrelak strategy was not warfare in the traditional sense. It was integration. They didn't conquer planets through brute force. They absorbed them, one person, one culture, one species at a time. But why him? Why go to such lengths to create an exact replica of a lowly human soldier? What did the Vrelek want from him specifically? And then it hit him. The thought was almost absurd in its simplicity, yet it explained everything. The elaborate ruse, the layers of deception, the false mission. They didn't need Andrew for his skill set. They needed him for his choices, his decision-making. His military mind wasn't being exploited for a single mission. It was being studied, replicated, and used. The Vrelek had no interest in killing or replacing him. They wanted to understand him. They wanted to understand humanity. The Vrelek thrived on absorbing what they didn't know. By infiltrating Andrew's mind, copying his actions, and replicating his thoughts, they were gathering data. But there was one thing they still hadn't accounted for. One thing that even they couldn't predict. Andrew's unpredictability. "You think you've seen everything about me," Andrew muttered, his voice low, almost conversational, his gaze fixed on the clone inside the sphere, but his words were meant for the Vrelek guard who still stood silently by the door. "But you haven't. You've learned my habits, my training, my protocols. You've dissected everything that makes me me." The guard's expression didn't change. It remained cold, mechanical, observing. The clone, however, seemed intrigued. "There's nothing left to learn," it said, its voice carrying a tone of finality. But Andrew felt it, that one flicker of hope, that tiny crack in the Vrelek's perfect plan. They had gathered everything about him except for the most important element, his capacity for chaos. They had underestimated the one thing that couldn't be quantified, categorized, or assimilated: human spontaneity. Andrew wasn't some cog in a machine. He was a person, and with that came something the Vrelek could never fully anticipate: choice. And his next move would define everything. Andrew took a breath, his hand still hovering near his sidearm. Then, slowly, deliberately, he removed the EMP device from his belt and held it up, letting the soft glow of its activation light catch the attention of both the clone and the Vrelek guard. "Everything you've learned about me," Andrew said softly, "has been from controlled environments, from simulations, from predictable responses to predictable situations." He stepped closer to the sphere, the EMP still held up like a bargaining chip. "But let me show you what you don't know." The clone's black eyes widened ever so slightly as Andrew's thumb hovered over the activation button on the EMP. In an instant, he could disable the ship's internal systems, triggering a cascade of failures. He didn't know exactly what would happen, but that was the point. Neither did they. "Humanity isn't about precision or logic," Andrew continued, his voice gaining strength. "We thrive on chaos, on the unexpected. You can try to mimic us, but you'll never truly understand us until you realize that some things can't be predicted or controlled." The clone's smile faltered. "You won't destroy this ship, Andrew. If you do, you'll die, and so will I. We're the same." Andrew took another step forward, the EMP now inches from the surface of the sphere. "No," he said, his voice calm. "We're not." For the first time, the clone seemed genuinely unnerved. The Vrelek had spent so much time and effort perfecting their control, their assimilation techniques, that they hadn't anticipated this. The moment when Andrew would reject the very thing that made them powerful. This was his window, the one flaw in their otherwise perfect plan. The Vrelek needed control. Andrew didn't. His unpredictability, his ability to act outside the constraints of logic and reason, was his greatest weapon. "You'll die with us?" the clone said again, more forceful this time, as if trying to reassert control. Andrew shook his head, a cold smile playing on his lips. "That's where you're wrong." And with that, Andrew lowered the EMP device, not into the sphere, but into his own chest. In one swift, decisive motion, he activated it, sending a pulse of electromagnetic energy surging through his body, disrupting every Vrelek technology that had integrated with him since he stepped aboard. The pain was immediate and excruciating, but Andrew didn't waver. The EMP shock wasn't meant to destroy the ship. It was meant to sever the connection between him and the clone, between him and the Vrelek's web of control. Every piece of data they had absorbed from him, every thought and reaction they had replicated, was now severed. The clone's eyes widened in shock, a brief flicker of confusion crossing its face as it realized what Andrew had done. The sphere began to hum with energy, the lights inside flickering wildly as the Vrelek systems fought to maintain control. "You cut the connection," the clone said, its voice strained. "You severed it." Andrew gritted his teeth against the pain, but he managed a grim smile. "You thought you could use me. You thought you could predict me. But you never understood what it meant to be human." The clone's expression twisted into something like fear. For the first time, it looked vulnerable, unsure of itself. The Vrelek guard at the door remained motionless, its cold eyes watching as the systems of the ship began to fluctuate, lights dimming and consoles flickering. Andrew stumbled back, his body weakened but his mind sharp. He had done it. He had broken free from their control. The Vrelek's entire plan hinged on their ability to assimilate and predict human behavior, but Andrew had shown them that they couldn't predict everything. They couldn't predict choice. They couldn't predict chaos. The clone inside the sphere convulsed, its form distorting as the Vrelek systems tried to compensate for the severed connection. It reached out toward Andrew, a look of desperation crossing its face. "We are not so different," it said, its voice faltering. "We could have been better together." Andrew shook his head. "No, you can't control what you don't understand." With that, the sphere flickered one last time before it shattered, the clone dissolving into nothingness as the Vrelek systems collapsed around it. Andrew stood in the now silent chamber, the lights dimming as the ship's power systems struggled to recover. The Vrelek guard remained at the door, but it no longer moved. Without the connection to the hive mind, it was just another lifeless puppet, its purpose nullified. Andrew took a deep breath, his body aching but his mind clear. He had won, not through brute force or by outsmarting the Vrelek at their own game, but by showing them that some things couldn't be quantified or controlled. He had shown them the one thing they couldn't replicate, the essence of being human. As he turned to leave the chamber, Andrew felt the weight of the moment settle over him. The Vrelek had tried to assimilate him, to make him part of their grand design. But in the end, it was their inability to understand what it meant to truly live that had undone them. He had survived, not by being stronger or faster or more technologically advanced. He had survived by being unpredictable, by embracing the chaos that made him human. And as he stepped back into the corridor, he knew one thing for certain. The Vrelek would never be able to replicate that. The end.